Thank you, Claudine. The first thing, please allow me, Mahadio Sukhai was actually an error on the program here. He's Atul Jaiswal is who is going to be presenting in his stead. I am going to just start out quickly by telling you something you all know. It turns out that in rehabilitation, of course, equity, diversity, inclusion, accessibility, these are topics that are completely familiar to us. And there are different ways of how these aspects are completely normal parts of what we do in our research. But now what has happened is that this has become more important at a larger level, at a society level. And suddenly this question of equity, diversity, inclusion, accessibility has a bigger scope. And so what we decided to do, following many of the concepts that come to this morning's keynote, when Mahadio Sukhai was telling us a lot about these approaches to research, to policy, from the perspective of including people with disabilities, I will launch us right away by introducing you to Bonnielin Sweener, who is our international invitee for our presentation today. Bonnielin is one of the driving people behind the Innova network that Mahadio mentioned this morning. And I will hand it over straight to Bonnie. Please tell us more about yourself, more about your role in this work, and what you want to tell us in this context today.
Thank you so much, Dr. Wittich. Thank you to everyone. It's so interesting to be in Canada while I'm sitting here in Baltimore, Maryland, in the United States. I'm really grateful for this session. So I'm Bonnie Swenor. I am an associate professor at the Johns Hopkins Wilmer Eye Institute. I am an epidemiologist. I have a joint appointment in the epidemiology department as well. And I am the founder and director of the Disability Health Research Center. Our tagline is changing the paradigm from living with a disability to thriving with a disability. And we're all about data science and research as a result. I guess you're driving the slides, Dr. Wittich. All right, thank you so much. So diversity, why is diversity in science and medicine so important? And I think that's the spirit of this wonderful group of panelists. I hear an echo with that.
I'm sorry, I'm going to just request that whoever is not presenting. Eva, do you mind, Eva, if you mute yourself? Thank you.
Okay, I don't. Walter, do I need to share the slides? Do you have the slide? Okay, great. All right, thank you, sir. So why is diversity in science and medicine so important? You can go to the next slide, please, sir. And so to me, it's all about perspective, and that's really why it matters. So what I'm showing on this slide is two people standing on either side of a number that's on the ground, and one sees a 6 and one sees a 9. The idea here of this image is to portray the idea that we all come to our data, our science, our research, our work with differing perspectives, and that matters. Who we are matters, the way we approach our work matters. As a data scientist, I think about this, and that's why I'm showing a data example here, in that it impacts the way we view our data, we interpret our data, the way we draw meaning from our data. And so the goal, obviously, of diversity and inclusion in science and in medicine, in clinical care, is to have a robust team of individuals who see the data in various ways. So we have the best chance for innovation, the best chance for holistic and well-rounded care for individuals. Next slide. So although I think this is not even a necessary slide for this group, what it's showing is that 15% of the global population, or 1 in 7 people, have a disability. That's data from the WHO, the World Health Organization. Although disability is so common, people with disabilities are underrepresented in science and medicine. So what we're talking about on this panel today, as Dr. Wittich described, is people with disabilities as us, as researchers, as scientists, as clinicians. Next slide. And so I've done some work in this space out of admittedly survival. I am a person with a disability, I have a visual disability, and my work in trying to understand how to better include people like me, people with disabilities, really was born out of trying to make sure I could keep my job, quite frankly. So what I'm showing on this slide is some of that work. So this is work with one of my constant colleagues, Lisa Meeks, who is at University of Michigan, soon to be University of Colorado, showing the prevalence or the percentage of US medical students who report having a disability. And what we showed is that percentage has changed from 2.7% in 2016 and almost doubled to 4.6% in 2019. Now, that is low. And in the United States, 26% of individuals living in the community, so that's excluding people living in congregate care settings, adults 18 and older, have a disability. So 26% is far greater than that 4.6%. So we have a way to go. Next slide. So Dr. Meeks also did another study very recently, fairly hot off the presses, using data from a nationally representative survey of practicing US physicians. I'm sorry, I apologize every time I speak to my friends in Canada of my Americanness in my data. And of that sample, only 3% of those physicians reported having a disability. Again, 3%, far less than the 26% we see in the population. Next slide. And I published some data a couple of years ago looking at researchers with disabilities who have funding from our largest federal funding agency, the National Institutes of Health. And I admit I had to submit what we call a FOIA request, a Freedom of Information Act, because I was not having such luck in getting this data. But that did allow me to get some information, and that's what I published on for 10 years, a 10-year period. And what we found that in 2008, only 1.9% of applicants and awardees applying to the NIH reported a disability. That steadily declined, and significantly so, down to 1.2% in 2018. Again, very far below what we would have anticipated, considering the 26% of Americans with a disability. Next slide. So additionally, from that data through the FOIA request from the NIH, we looked at by disability category. Now, the way that the questions about disability were asked were, do you have a vision disability, a hearing disability, a mobility disability, or other? So as an epidemiologist, I know that's not even ideal, but that's what was asked. And that's the data we had. And so of those categories, individuals, researchers with visual disabilities had the second lowest percentage of grants awarded. The lowest were people who checked the other category box. So I, as an individual with a vision disability, felt a bit validated, admittedly, with this data. I will also just make clear that information about an individual's disability status when applying for a grant is not shown during study section. But this data does indicate that there are systemic barriers. Next slide. Did you have a question, Walter? I thought maybe you were going to say something.
No, we're good.
I am just going to add that I looked into some Canadian data, and I did find, and I didn't get to make the cut to make this ad in the slides, that data from the Canadian Institutes of Health Research, I think Walter pointed me in this direction, published some data not too long ago, and indicates that, not unlike in the US, 3% of investigators report a disability. The grant success rate is 11% as compared to 17% among investigators or applicants without a disability. And this is data from the COVID-19 funding competition sample that came out not too long ago. So a similar paradigm from what those data indicate to me is occurring in Canada. Okay, so the impact of inclusion, sorry, I confused you. The impact of, why do we care? Why do we need to include researchers with disabilities? You know, I say, well, it's not just the right thing to do, it's good for science, quite honestly. You know, I think that whenever, as I started out this conversation, we have a robust and diverse group of researchers, we have a better chance of our research having impact, driving policy change. And to me, I'm a public health professional, that's what I'm actually interested in. There's also a better opportunity to advance health equity when you have diverse perspectives, including people with disabilities, on the team, thinking about the questions. And it's not just disability questions, it's all questions. And you know, when you are considering research, medical settings, it really is an important inflection point for shifting societal perspectives. Leaving people with disabilities out of that team is really missing the mark and missing an opportunity for that. Next slide. I know I'm running short on time. So what can you do? And this is what the rest of the panel really is going to be discussing. And I know this is preaching to the choir on this one, is prioritizing accessibility. And those first two talks were all about that. You know, ensuring the content. And I don't think we think about this enough. Well, I know we don't. Natalie will attest to this. We talk about it all the time. The content of our scientific information needs to be accessible, right? Our virtual spaces, our social spaces, our physical spaces must be accessible. Additionally, we need to consider the disability data gaps that exist. These gaps in information perpetuate exclusion and inequities. So what I mean by that is whenever you're collecting information in a study, in a research question, or in a research setting about age, gender, race, think about collecting disability. That goes for your science, but also for who's on your team as far as diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts. Understand the importance and value of language. I think it's important to always pause and take a minute and think about, are the words you're using to describe the population the way the population wants to be described? That really should be the driving force about that. And I know, I believe that others on this panel will talk about that more. And include disability. This overlaps all of those concepts. Include disability in all efforts around diversity, equity, and inclusion in research, as well as who's in your studies. Again, I know I'm preaching to the choir on this call about that. Disability must be part of the equation. People with disabilities are part of all of our communities. Next slide. And so my work is really all about including people with disabilities to make social change and research to do that. And it really is necessary to advance health and equity for everyone in our communities. It's a critical component, but part of that is also including people with disabilities on the team doing the work. And that's it. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
On this slide, I'll just read aloud what I have. You can learn more about my Disability Center at disabilityhealth.jhu.edu. You can follow us on Twitter if you're on Twitter at JHU Disability. And we have a podcast with transcripts. You can find it at IncludedPod on Twitter. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Bonnielin. It remains an honor to be an ally, to work with you. And it's an exciting learning adventure for me. Every time we do something, I learn something new. It's simply a pleasure working with you. I'm going to transition us right next to the next person in our panel, Dr. Natalina Martinello, who is bringing an entirely different perspective, also from lived experience, but a different place in her career. Natalie, handing it over to you, our local blind expert.
Thank you, Walter, and thank you, Bonnie. I always love listening to you speak. So hello, everyone. I'm going to be talking a bit about accessibility and inclusion by weaving in my experiences as someone who is blind and who recently completed a PhD. And so I'd like to begin by first touching on what it is like to be the first or to be perceived among the first to do something, because This is a commonality that many underrepresented people share. I want to kind of just point out that, I am the first blind PhD in my department, and in the career and even in Walter's lab where I completed my research and where I'm still working today, but I'm not the first blind PhD in Montreal and certainly not in the world. And we see so many examples of empowering examples of progress from others who work in this space and who have worked in this space. For example, I created a Facebook group for blind PhDs where we can share lessons we've learned, and that's been very helpful. And so if you are a supervisor or a blind PhD student yourself, consider those larger contexts because there are lots of resources out there. I just want to highlight 3 common questions that you might hear when you are perceived to be the only or among the few to do something. So the first question is, how much of an issue is inclusion or accessibility when it seems that so few people with disabilities are in research? So Bonnie touched on this already, but of course, one of the things that we all know is that there are many people who have invisible disabilities, so we can't really quantify this number based on what we see among our colleagues. But of course, as we all know also, the only way we can really raise those numbers is if we collectively work to dismantle the barriers that actually do exist. A second common question relates to overgeneralizations. So we sometimes we're put in the position of representing an entire group. So in my case, for example, that would be blind people. And there are lots of commonalities that cut across our experiences, but overgeneralizations could also present a number of barriers. So I think back to taking a stats course early on in my PhD and requesting Braille material, and I received a lot of pushback because I was told that the last blind person to take this course 10 years ago did not need Braille. So this really also highlights as a concept that we all know well, which is, viewing disability through an intersectional lens. The final question is, how did you succeed, or what does it take to succeed as a blind PhD? And so here I just want to highlight that really this requires the same elements of any successful PhD. You need commitment and talent and creativity and strong writing skills. Those things don't change. The only difference is that the stakes are higher because people outside of our space might connect our successes and failures to our blindness. We'll move to the next slide, Walter. So accessibility is one part of inclusion, but it's certainly not the only component. In research, this can take the form of accessing databases or protocols to submit for ethics, using software to analyze data, publishing your work, presenting your work, and reading the work of others. There are international guidelines, but these are often not included in the procurement process within universities and other research institutions. My screen reading software will read aloud content, but if that space is inherently inaccessible, then it simply won't work. So if your website has an image, that will pose a problem. And so as we all know, obviously this kind of just highlights the importance of design and looking beyond the individual. Mia Mingus coined a term, access intimacy, and she defines this as that elusive, hard to describe feeling when someone else gets your access needs. And what she's really referring to here is being in a situation where others understand. And she's touching on that emotional toll of inaccessibility, of having to push back or plan ahead. And I include this here for 2 reasons. One is because I want to highlight that inaccessibility can unconsciously send the message that certain people do not belong. And when a person says, or organization says that we believe accessibility is important, but we didn't have the time, what they're unintentionally saying is it's not important enough. And that's something that we all need to bear in mind and try not to perpetuate. The other point I want to highlight about access intimacy is that it's not only shared among disabled colleagues, we all have experiences of being excluded, and drawing on these connection points can be really empowering to build solidarity and meaningful change. We'll move to the next slide. So the final point I want to say here about accessibility is that you don't need to be a tech genius to incorporate basic accessibility. So for example, in a PowerPoint, you can right-click on your image and select Edit All Text to add a description to your images to make those accessible. We'll move to the next slide. So inclusion moves beyond accessibility. As we all know, inclusion really refers to who has a voice, who's represented, and at what level. And so one experience that I could draw on is early on in my PhD when I attended an event that was accessible. And I had entered the building and I was giving my dog some water, and somebody who walked by dropped some change into the bowl. And so they were really attaching that symbol of charity and blindness to what they saw in me. And so since then, I've thought about this a lot. And I think a lot about what if that person is a professor or a future employer? What if they are to acquire a visual impairment or a disability later on in life? And what do things like this really tell us about how we perceive disability? And so this is why representation at all levels is so important and why we need to be thinking beyond just accessibility. So we'll move to the final slide that I have here. And I just want to say a few words about allyship and what we can all do to be effective allies to move inclusion forward. First, we encourage you to listen and just ask questions. I've included some hashtags that you can follow on Twitter to learn more about meaningful, really important conversations that are happening right now, like hashtag A11Y. There are many others. And then the next thing I would, I guess, highlight is that it's also really important to learn and apply what you've heard from others. So for example, I often talk about accessibility from a dignity perspective. You know, I can be given, other people can read information to me, but that removes my dignity and my choice. And over the past few years, I've noticed that Walter will often use the same language, and that's been really empowering for me. And then the final point I'll highlight is that, you know, we encourage everyone to just get involved, as many of you here I know already are. As Bonnie mentioned, we are initiating the International Network of Researchers with Visual Impairments and their allies. We will have more information about that very soon, and we encourage anyone to ask us questions if you'd like to get involved. So I will stop there and turn it over to Atul.
Second, thank you, Natalie. As I make our transition to Atul, it's been a privilege being your PhD supervisor. Again, you know, I'm learning something new every day, and I still do. Thank you, Natalie. Which takes us to our third speaker today, which is my current postdoc, Atul Jaiswal, who is going to take a slightly different spin on this question of equity, diversity, and inclusion, and also mixing in a part of his own lived experience. I'll let him explain himself. Atul, over to you.
Bonjour, everyone. I'm Atul Jaiswal. I'm a CHR Health System Impact Postdoctoral Fellow with Dr. Wittich in his lab. And today, using the next few minutes, I'll try to tell my perspective on ADI as someone who is heterosexual male in mid-30s with brown color skin, black eyes, and black hairs, born and raised in India, and immigrated to Canada in 2015 to pursue my PhD in rehab science. With respect to my training, I'm a trained occupational therapist as well as a trained rehab social worker. So I'll try to advance what my colleagues have already mentioned about ADI. And yeah, so next slide, I would like to, no, I think that, yeah. So I would like to start by saying that South Asia, where I come from, is a diverse population of 655 million people who speak more than 1,000 different languages. I wanted to take this opportunity to showcase some of the inspiring role models in India who have vision impairment and have excelled in their life. In the left picture that you see is a Dr. Chowdhury Jadhav, who received the National Award for his inspiring work and he's right now head of accessibility research and innovation at Tata Consultancy Services. It's one of the lead consultancy services company in India. In the middle, next click, please. Yeah, in the middle, we have Vishal Agrawal, who has a credit of being first blind trader with the financial giant Standard Chartered Bank. And he's the first blind trader in Asia and second in the world. And on the right picture, we have Shekhar Nayak, who is the captain of Indian blind cricket team. And with his leadership, Indian team won 2 times the World Cup, like the Blind World Cup. Before coming to Canada, I was working with individuals with vision impairment on community-based rehabilitation project, and I have learned a lot in those days of field work. And I will add that I'm learning every other day, especially on how to embrace and embed abstract concepts such as EDI, equity, diversity, and inclusion, in our rehabilitation research and clinical practice. Next slide. This brings me to my slide on my understanding of EDI and why I believe EDI is very critical in our work as rehabilitation researcher or clinician. I'm not going to repeat the definitions of EDI, which was already mentioned, but rather use this time to present 2 arguments that I believe are important for us. First, we think of scientists or clinicians who do most of their work outside the domain of disability rehabilitation. Maybe for them, disability inclusion is not on the agenda list. They'll plan and conduct the studies without including anyone with a disability or impairment. But for us who are working in the field of rehabilitation science and have learned about disability from our training or our work with our clients with vision impairment, I think we have even more responsibility to bring disability inclusion and equity forefront in our work as well as in our research. Because if we don't do it, who will do it? And how can we expect others who have very limited knowledge about disability to have EDI as a key agenda in their work? The second argument that I bring here is all about the idea of belongingness that also Natalie brought in her presentation. My PhD research was all about understanding lived experience of people who have who have deaf blindness. And in that, one of the core themes that emerged was to enable someone's participation. Belongingness is the core piece that is important. So, like, if people feel belong, then they participate in their world in the best possible way. So now I'm using this idea and situating it in the context of our rehabilitation practice and research. I believe that our clients and research participants will feel that they belong if we have incorporated EDI principles in our work and show genuine intent to embrace and reflect them in our work. Once they feel they belong and have trust in us as their clinician or researcher, their treatment compliance will improve, our research data will be rich, and there will be a long-term rapport bond that will benefit both. Next slide, please. I'll move our discussion to another interesting concept of intersectionality. We all know that intersectionality can be any social factor that shapes your identity. So, but it can play in a positive way or negative way. It can lead to positive way and lead to privileges, and sometimes can go in negative direction and lead to barriers or discrimination. That depends on the context in which one is in. Why does one care about it in rehabilitation practice and research? I think it is important because intersectionality allows us to better understand inequalities through reflection on how social domains intersect and shapes one experience. And finally, produce varying levels of power and privilege for individuals, which help us to reflect on who got included and who did we miss and what needs to be done. This brings me to my next question. Next slide, please. I would like to leave it with you to think how power relations intersect in rehabilitation context to produce vulnerability for a specific group in specific context. And the context could be our clinical or research setting. Next slide, please. So now I'll talk about some of the approaches that have proven some sort of like value for EDI embedment in the work that we do. The first one is use of inclusive language. It is person-centered language that is respectful and appropriate. It goes beyond person-first language that we use in the disability field. So for disability, it will be person first, not focusing on their negative side, but on the positive side, their abilities. For Indigenous people, we all know that in Canada, we have 3 different groups of Indigenous population: First Nations, Inuit, and Métis. So be sure that we are not considering them as a homogeneous group and labeling them with one category. Use gender neutral terms rather than those that make sex distinctions. Respect the preferences of individuals or groups concerned about their sexual orientation. Avoid defaulting to umbrella terms such as gay or homosexual. And finally, avoid generalizations and stereotyping based on race or ethnicity to prevent implicit or explicit bias or stereotype. Next slide, please. And finally, I'll talk about in the next 2 slides, I'll talk about the attitudinal change and the other strategy that is in place. Attitudinal change is all about approach that can help you improve EDI. Once you know that what is your attitude towards disability or towards a particular person, I think then we can change. And some of the strategies that has helped to change attitude are direct contact with people with disabilities, focus on children, because if you change their mindset early on, they will have a different approach towards our attitude towards persons with disability. Focus on health professionals, because we as health professionals, we have a big role to play, because whatever word we use, people will follow that. And finally, discrepancy awareness, where through the educational activity, you make someone realize about their implicit bias or implicit attitude towards disability. Next slide, please. Another approach is cultural competency. It is given by Diane Goodman. She talks about 5 of these components. I will not go in detail because we don't have enough time, but I'll touch on, like, I start from self-awareness first, where you need to identify what is your identity, what are your biases and prejudices, and how it changes your behavior towards others. Second would be understanding and appreciating others' perspective on something, and then trying to go from there. Third is all about understanding social inequities and why one group is disadvantaged and why one group is getting privilege over the others. Finally, the fourth one is ability to adapt and work with a diverse group of people. And fifth one is, once you are aware that what inequities exist and you are aware of those inequities, what are you doing to change those, transform and change that particular, the inequity, basically moving from inequity to equity. To conclude, the final key sort of, next slide, please. Yeah, to conclude that, like, here are some of the key strategies. I will not go in detail, but I'll just enumerate them. A leadership team is needed, which can ensure that EDI implementation is incorporated in policies as well as done in proper way. Transparency about EDI gaps and progress. Moment of truth interventions, like it's all about aha moments when you realize that, oh, like this was my implicit bias, and then what are you doing about it? Training in areas like EDI and bias awareness. And finally, having visible role models and champions of EDI, and having anti-discrimination policies and procedures. Thank you. I'm happy to take any questions. I'm sorry, yeah, it's already, time was over, so I rushed.
I'm pretty sure that Claudine will tell us whether we actually have any time for questions, but to just have one final sentence, you can tell that all members of our panel are very passionate about this topic. And I think that this also applies to many of the people within the career. I'll hand it over to you, Claudine, to manage the rest of the time.